Let's imagine you're stuck right here on this island. What would you do? And before you go to the comments to type something like perish, I guess, hear me out on this, because there's something about being stranded on an island as these in-between worlds. Not quite part of the sea, not quite part of the main land. And I think I've played enough games and seen enough movies to know that if it were me, truly alone on a sliver of land surrounded by miles of endless water with no knowledge of what might be swimming just beneath the surface, I'd have to focus on not going insane. There is a particular power to islands as small enclosed worlds suspended between states, an interface where Earth meets the fluid ocean, making them literal thresholds that are always at the boundary of two completely different environments. So what I'm going to do today is travel through different unique islands, both real and fictional, to understand their liminal quality by exploring seemingly bright and whimsical places like this, and some cosmic horror-infused basins like this. To start our journey, there's a nameless forgotten place located somewhere in the South Pacific that's beckoning to be explored. The game Call of the Sea asked me to search for someone on a seemingly deserted island. But after exploring the beautiful landscape, it quickly began to recontextualize that goal. The lush tropical vegetation and abandoned camps lured me in as the environment served as an intricate puzzle box. And I enjoyed breaking my brain over some of these puzzles. However, it was really the increasingly strange yet beautiful biomes that kept pushing me forward to see all the island had to offer. But the mountain tops and stone structures gradually gave way to something unsettling. This place is not a setting for exploration, but a transitional space that gradually removes the protagonist from both her identity and her assumptions about the world. The idea of being stuck on an island and physically isolated is familiar. What is less familiar is the psychological decay that follows. With the structures of the mainland stripped away, there are no cities, no schedules, no quick way to ask someone for directions or help, only the steady hum of the sea and the slow press of the island itself. There's something called architectural circularity, and it's the key to island horror because it's about creating a kind of closed psychological system. Consider this. When you're stuck on an island, there's nowhere to run, which means every fear must be faced directly. There's no society, so meaning and value start to wither away. There's no context, so even the most mundane events can become uncanny. It's why so many island horror stories become psychological horror. Unlike other liminal spaces, they don't loop. There's no backtracking, no hallway to escape down to, just an endless perimeter in the form of a circle you walk again and again, with no exit but the sea, the ultimate form of isolation. Even in Call of the Sea, water seems to be the only way out, but then you're met with one of the most horrifying moments I've seen in a game. But more on that later. So why do islands feel isolating? I remember seeing a video about North Sentinel Island, one of the most secluded and dangerous places on Earth, where in 2018 an American missionary was killed by its indigenous people. My dreams of exploring archipelagos on the vast open ocean vanished immediately after hearing that, with ancient maps and accounts depicting the inhabitants as dangerous cannibals crushing my hopes even further. The truth is, for thousands of years, the world these people knew was a quiet existence of hunting and gathering, but even that reality was suddenly shattered when a ship from the British Empire arrived in the 1700s to announce the presence of a universe beyond their shores. And with it, a new set of rules, a new kind of violence, and new societies that the island's isolation could no longer protect them from. In the same way that Sentinel's island's inhabitants resisted contact, an island's very nature creates an almost mythical barrier with its coral reefs, dense jungles, and resistance to outsiders. A physical boundary, but also a threshold in the form of a forbidden zone where rules of the outside world seem to just dissolve. But that sense of foreboding is a frequent motive in mythology because they represent places we shouldn't go, places where gods or monsters are set to dwell. Maybe the game that exemplifies the minimalistic environmental horror of an island better than any other media is No One Lives Under the Lighthouse. While I explored this island, every step revealed that it's a place so small, I could barely call it a location at all. Yet despite being too small to hide anything, it's somehow still a big enough island to get lost in. Not that that means anything, because a game titled No One Lives Under the Lighthouse wouldn't lie to me, right? There's no forest to run through, no dungeon to descend, just an empty house, an old lighthouse, and a path you walk again and again to repeat your daily tasks. Fix the generator, clean the floor, refuel the light. It's the kind of spatial repetition that turns a physical perimeter into a mental one. Because on the surface it looked like I was just a new hire, sent to replace the previous lighthouse keeper who mysteriously disappeared. But the strange events on the island suggest something more sinister. Dead seagulls appear in strange places, the lighthouse frequently gets swarmed by moths. The isolation starts as geographical but ends as a psychological pressure cooker designed to break the mind. A journey to tend to the light inevitably becomes a struggle for anyone to avoid being consumed by the island itself. The thing about this slow descent into madness is that it's a recurring idea across fiction and even in our real-world history. The island as a self-contained prison, a world designed to punish, contain, or simply forget. So on a literal level, islands have always served as the perfect location for banishment, with Alcatraz as the most famous example. Places where the land itself is an extension of the walls. The uncrossable sea are the bars on the cell. Perhaps the most effective islands are the ones that replace physical guards with psychological walls. I can't help but think of the 2010 movie Shutter Island, where the entire location is a prison designed for the mind. For the majority of the movie, the protagonist thinks he's uncovering the mysteries of the island, not realizing it's the island that is uncovering him. But no matter how hard he tries, the island is physically inescapable. Rocky, storm-battered, and surrounded by violent seas, steep cliffs, and a constant fog. It's clear why the thought of being stuck on an island has never left us. In a similar way, two men are stranded on a remote island in the movie The Lighthouse, as their slow descent into madness is fueled by the relentless monotony and isolation of the island itself. It gets to the point where the sound of a foghorn becomes an omen, and the lighthouse lamp is the source of a divine madness they simply can't stand to ignore anymore. Even more than the howling wind and gnawing solitude, the lighthouse keepers burn down the boundaries between man, myth, and delusion. But the island and the sea are simply forces of nature that exist outside of human wants and needs. What other place could possibly embody this cold, indifferent power? I'm reminded of another location lost to the ocean. This frigid, glacier-covered place is called Bouvet Island, a subantarctic landmass often called the most isolated island on Earth. In fact, it's so remote, so desolate, that when an abandoned lifeboat was found here in 1964, no one could explain how it arrived. There were no survivors found, no wreckage, no messages, just a vessel in a place with no context. And there's a reason islands feel like they want to be filled. And I'm not necessarily talking about people as much as I am about stories. As detached worlds somewhere in the ocean, distant shores naturally become blank slates for tales as a narrative vacuum, offering an abandoned lifeboat to become the ultimate launchpad for stories to be born. It's this apathetic quality that bleeds into our understanding of islands across different media. It's much more lighthearted, but my favorite example of this is tucked away in the southeastern sea of Breath of the Wild, called Eventide Island. A vibrant patch of paradise at first glance, an isolating challenge for survival at second glance. I still remember the first time I set sail, and the moment I set foot on its shore, everything was taken from me. My weapons, armor, my delicious, carefully prepared food. Just like that, I had to survive using only what the island provides, simply enforcing its own laws by stripping away all achievements and hard-earned power. It becomes a story that isn't about the hero of Hyrule, but the story of a person, a ground zero where worth is measured by the raw will to survive. There is of course. Another Legend of Zelda game where the islands are hardly in short supply. However, while most islands we've seen use their liminality to trap and consume you, Wind Waker uses them to invite you in. This is a world built of nothing but islands surrounded by a vast ocean filled with hidden treasures and sunken secrets. This is why, interestingly, the islands aren't actually the liminal space here, because the ocean itself fills that role. A vast, mostly empty expanse to sail across on a tiny boat. Like being adrift between states of being, every island becomes an anchor point in a sea of unknown. But because this world isn't focused on a single island and rather the relationship between them, I always think back to the island that is almost exactly at the center of the map. Tower of the Gods is a massive, ancient ruin that rises from the sea as a permanent monument to a long-forgotten era. When I looked at this massive structure for the first time, I definitely didn't feel like a hero, but more like a curious trespasser exploring the remnants of a place that has long since moved on. So the fear isn't of being stuck on an island, but being lost between them. The sea represents the overwhelming unknown, and each island is a promise of certainty in the otherwise uncertain deep blue. It feels like a monument to the kind of isolation that ignores the claustrophobia of a single outpost and instead slowly lets the loneliness of an endless ocean creep in. It's a different kind of terror, but one that still forces anyone to find meaning in the empty spaces between islands. The thing about archipelagos is that the setting they usually default to is a tropical one. You know, the ones full of dense jungles and unique species? Perhaps not like the island in King Kong that looks like an overgrown nightmare with prehistoric beasts and ancient ruins behind every vine-choked path, but green enough to create a visually appealing backdrop. It seems to be a popular choice to use an island's lushness as a sort of narrative disguise. In 2013's Tomb Raider, the island lures visitors in with waterfalls and treetop vistas before revealing a death cult and ancient storms that trap anyone who dares to leave. Even Lost, the show that single-handedly turned mysterious islands into a pop culture phenomenon, begins with a beachside paradise and slowly unravels into bunkers, polar bears, and temporal anomalies. It seems that it's never enough for an island to be beautiful. They're beautiful and hostile. Beautiful and haunted. They invite victims in with a promise of paradise and reveal their true nature when it's too late to leave. I think one of the most striking examples of this is Yakushima, a subtropical island off the southern coast of Japan, known for its ancient forest and constant rainfall. Its ecosystem is dense, dreamlike, and almost impossibly old. It's no surprise that this place became the spiritual blueprint for Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, because even in a story not overtly about an island, the island logic can be seen everywhere in this movie. The spirits of the forest are leftovers of a place untouched by industrial logic, but as the outside world tries to reshape it, you can feel the island resist until its last breath. I couldn't stop thinking about what an island does when it strips away the rules of a society, because everywhere I looked in Call of the Sea, I saw traces of a civilization that had once restructured its entire worldview to fit the logic of isolation. Different carvings and relics were the most obvious signs of a culture that used to be able to exist entirely on its own terms. I was completely fascinated while walking around and seeing environmental oddities that were integrated from resources taken directly from the only land available. And as the protagonist encounters these curiosities, it's apparent that there's more going on than just the uncovering of an ancient civilization. At the start of the game, this is shown as a mysterious illness that manifests as dark splotches on her hands, a disease that seems to be linked to strange visions of flooded rooms and scorched wastelands filled with dead leviathans. This, however, was just the beginning of the island's grasp taken over, because this is the kind of island that isn't content with outsiders seeking to understand its secrets. So through a biological link, this disease is actually a way for the island to feel who belongs within its unknowable shores. It provides a way for that person to shred the identity they always clung to, so they can be who they're meant to be as a part of this new land. Because what is an island really, if not a mirror? A place so far gone from the things that usually hold a person together. A place that forces a person into a state of liminality, suspended between who they were and what they might become. Games and stories return to this format frequently as a form of transformation. Odysseus marooned with Calypso, Prospero banished with his magic, Tom Hanks and his volleyball. It takes one look at this face to know for a fact that the castaway archetype endures through the ages. And it's not a modern development that the majority of these island stories are about identity slipping, because the boundaries of the mind, just like the coastline, are always eroding. And I can't think of a place where this erosion is more literal, more cosmic than in the Stellar Basin from Dredge. Technically, this game doesn't take place on an island, but it might as well, because while you're sailing around this archipelago, you find different islands with their surrounded ecosystems all corrupted by one of the many cosmic beasts hiding beneath the waves. Once you're on the ship, there is no liminal boundary, because you're permanently on the water. The entire map is an ocean, and any fish you're unable to catch will try to catch you instead. As such, Stellar Basin is one of the more visually stunning areas, but the islands are like infected zones. It's a circular abyss in the ocean floor that corrupts everything surrounding it. While it's not a traditional island, it behaves exactly like one, as a fixed zone of madness surrounded by the false safety of water. This place embodies the idea of ecological liminality as a place where life is mutating. The monster that is surrounded by the small islands doesn't need to break the surface and instead influences the surrounding by corrupting the life forms. However, as a fishing game, Dredge is not just the experience of avoiding eldritch forces. My favorite thing to do when I'm not being chased by a cosmic god is to chart a course between different islands and see what the ecosystems have to offer. Because looking back, it's always been about discovery and getting an understanding of the world. And so historically, islands were always seen as the holy grail of discovery. Stories of ancient navigators sailing thousands of miles across the Pacific with only starlight and wave patterns as guide. They managed to chart entire archipelagos long before Western maps even came close to catching up. These navigators would, for example, use the sophisticated science of wayfinding to settle nearly every habitable island in the largest ocean on Earth. They didn't rely on charts or compasses, but on a deep, almost spiritual connection to the natural world, reading ocean swells, bird migration patterns, and the position of the stars. It was an astonishing feat of human will and knowledge that remains unparalleled. And I think that's why the human psyche has never let go of the urge to travel beyond the horizon. An urge so strong that it infuses every voyage into folklore and every story into myth. Islands are home to deities and beings that simply can't exist inside the known world. Look no further than the Moana movies, because the story of Maui and the mythical island of Te Fiti is a reflection of these very real navigation traditions, where the sea and the islands are a living part of the world, filled with powerful spirits and sunken gods. It's no coincidence that when these type of stories surface, the monsters tend to follow as extensions of the setting itself. Because in myth, the sea is never just water, but a thin veil between the known and unknowable. Things that can't survive on land, but can't be ignored at sea. The ocean's depths are the perfect breeding ground for myths to take hold, and in many stories, the sea monsters are the island's guardians. Their presence transforms a simple island into a fortified, forbidden zone, a place that is difficult to reach and even harder to leave. They act as the physical manifestation of the island's liminality, ensuring that the rules of the outside world remain separate and that the island's unique ecosystem stays untamed. So the monster that lives under the lighthouse is the physical manifestation of this idea, an ancient thing that ensures the lighthouse keeper can never truly leave the island. It erodes his humanity until he becomes a monster himself, as a grotesque being shaped by the island's isolation. I tried to analyze this eldritch force in one of my creature analysis shorts, and what I found was even more disturbing than what a single island could do to someone. But this is a recurring idea in folklore and adventure stories. The monster isn't just a beast to be slain, but a test to be passed. It's the final, terrifying piece of a world that is meant to remain separate. Speaking of monsters, Call of the Sea doesn't end the way you might expect. In the final chapter, the protagonist discovers that the creatures he's been seeing are not hallucinations, but beings that are part of her. Her condition, which she once believed to be a curse, is revealed as a form of ancestral transformation linked to the island itself. A place that is steeped in old magic and biology that simply refuses to separate the body from landscape. Its ruins, waters, and creatures are components in a living system of inheritance and metamorphosis. A kind of liminal shrine where bloodlines and bodies are rewritten. So in the end, there's only a single choice left to make: return home, or surrender to the island and embrace the new being inside. Become something that belongs to this land in a way the rest of the world rejected. It's a perfect end to a story about islands as crucibles of change, about acceptance in the way the island demands, or being left behind by it. So perhaps that's the enduring mystery of islands. They are never just patches of land surrounded by water, but liminal forces where identities fracture, transform, or are erased. They are thresholds, prisons, and tombs, always standing at the boundary between two worlds, refusing to be fully claimed by either. Because on the mainland we have roads that lead elsewhere, on the sea currents that pull us away, but on an island there is only the circle. The perimeter is an endless loop that strips a person down to their core until the only thing left to confront is yourself. And maybe that's why islands make for such powerful stories. They ask a question few other settings can. What do you become when there's nowhere left to run? Sometimes the answer is madness. Sometimes it's transformation. And just maybe, sometimes it's simply learning how to survive one more day, with the waves crashing against the rocks and the horizon stretching out forever. Hey, thank you for watching as always. If you're looking for more bite-sized content like the Lighthouse monster analysis I mentioned in the video, check out my creature analysis playlist. I try to upload at least a couple of shorts every week there. And make sure to let me know what you'd like to see in the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, and hit the bell notification icon so I'll see you in the next video.